So I used high-dose nicotine pouches daily for almost 3 years. Zyn, 6 milligrams, multiple times a day, sometimes one after another. And then I quit, cold turkey, no patch, no meds, just regular nicotine-free chewing gum. So why are people saying this stuff is more addictive than cigarettes? Why are some biohackers swearing it's the ultimate productivity tool? And what's actually going on under the hood when you use nicotine this way? That's what we're going to unpack today. So let's start here. Nicotine pouches, Zyn, On, Rogue, Alp, you name it, have exploded in popularity, especially among people who'd never go near a cigarette. Former smokers, sure, but also software engineers, grad students, fitness guys, venture capitalists, people who are otherwise very health-focused, very performance-focused, are now using a stimulant that was once synonymous with lung cancer and ashtrays. And they're doing it in the name of productivity, energy, mood, even longevity. Now, if that sounds weird, it is. But it also makes sense, because stripped of all the toxic smoke and tar and combustion, nicotine itself is a fascinating compound. It stimulates attention, it sharpens reaction time, it can even boost working memory in the short term. But here's the twist, nicotine doesn't stay neutral forever. And depending on how you use it, how often, how fast, what dose, you can go from cognitive boost to chemical leash pretty fast. I know this because I lived it. From 3 milligram pouches to 6 milligrams and ultimately to 9 milligrams, sometimes 2 at a time. I developed a pretty heavy pouch habit over about 2.5 to 3 years, easily a 10.5 per day. And the wild thing, I never felt out of control. I never hit what people would call rock bottom. But at some point I looked up and realized I wasn't getting a benefit anymore. I was just using it to feel normal. So this episode is for anyone curious about how these things actually work, the short-term upside, the long-term costs, and whether there are smarter, less addictive ways to use nicotine. Now let's talk physiology for a second. Nicotine, at its core, is a stimulant. It binds to nicotinic acetylcholine receptors in your brain, especially in areas related to attention, arousal, and reward. And that receptor activation, it triggers a chain reaction. Dopamine release, norepinephrine spike, and a little adrenaline surge. You'll feel sharper, more alert, your mood lifts slightly. And for a first-time user, sometimes it's borderline euphoric. But, and here's the key, that's only the beginning. One of the major systems nicotine activates is your HPA axis. That's your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal system. It's basically your brain's central stress response command center. Nicotine turns this system on, hard. Within minutes of use, cortisol levels rise. Epinephrine, that's adrenaline, goes up. Heart rate, blood pressure, all of it climbs. And this is partly why nicotine can feel energizing. It's literally triggering a micro-stress response. And that's not inherently bad. Acute stress in controlled doses can be performance enhancing. Think, exercise, cold plunges, public speaking. But here's the problem. When you use nicotine every day, multiple times a day, that acute stress response starts to lose its edge. Your brain and body adapt. Cortisol stays chronically elevated, but your ability to respond to stress, to mount a normal surge under pressure, that actually goes down. Studies on smokers and snooze users show exactly this. Their resting cortisol is high, but when they're put in a stressful situation like public speaking, their cortisol barely moves. In plain English, chronic nicotine users live in a constant on state, but they lose their ability to gear up when they actually need it. And that, for me, is one of the most overlooked downsides to regular nicotine use. It's not just about addiction. It's about flattening your body's ability to respond to life. Now here's where it gets interesting. Not all nicotine delivery is created equal. A cigarette spikes nicotine levels in the blood within minutes. That sharp, fast rise is what makes smoking so addictive. The faster the rise, the stronger the reinforcement loop. Vaping, it depends. Newer devices with nicotine salts can mimic cigarette-level spikes. Earlier versions, not so much. Pouches, though, they sit somewhere in the middle. Slower onset. Nicotine absorbed through the mucosa in your mouth. A 6 milligram pouch might peak in 30 to 60 minutes. A 30 milligram pouch, yes, they exist, can hit blood nicotine levels higher than a cigarette. But even then, the rise is slower. Now, why does this matter? Because speed and intensity determine addiction risk. The faster you get that spike, the more your brain links nicotine with reward. That's classic pharmacology. A sharp hit is like ringing Pavlov's bell. It trains the behavior. With pouches, that learning is a little softer, but still very real, especially if you're using them all day, one after another. That constant low-grade exposure can wire you into a dependency loop that feels mild, but is incredibly persistent. I'll put it this way. You might not feel hooked, but try going a few days without. The subtle fatigue, the irritability, the fog, it creeps in. That's your new baseline talking. Now let's bust a few myths. So myth number one, nicotine pouches are harmless. Not true. They're far less harmful than cigarettes, and that's clear. No tar, no combustion, no lung damage, but harmless? Absolutely not. Nicotine alone increases your heart rate and blood pressure. It disrupts sleep. It alters your stress hormones. And over time, it rewires your brain's reward pathways in subtle but very real ways. Myth number 2, nicotine reduces stress. Sort of. What it really does is relieve withdrawal. If you're already dependent, that morning pouch doesn't make you less stressed. It just brings you back to baseline. That's the trick. It feels calming because you're avoiding the dip. And in fact, smokers and heavy nicotine users consistently report more stress in daily life than non-users. And after quitting, their stress levels go down. And that's not theory, that's data. Myth number 3, you can use it daily as a nootropic. Only if you're willing to accept diminishing returns. In the beginning, nicotine gives you a boost, better focused, better memory encoding, more alertness. But as tolerance builds, that edge fades. You end up needing it just to feel normal. This is the classic diminishing returns trap. What started as a biohack becomes a baseline requirement, and the cognitive benefit, it's gone. Okay, so is there a smarter way to use nicotine? Perhaps. If you're not currently dependent, meaning you haven't built up tolerance and you don't have daily cravings, then yes, there may be a case for intermittent, purposeful use. But let me be precise here. Using a low-dose pouch once or twice a week, in the morning before deep work or maybe pre-workout, could give you a legitimate cognitive and performance boost. Think of it like caffeine. If you're not a daily user, it works. If you are, it's just maintenance. But, and this is important, that kind of use requires discipline. You can't let it drift into daily routine, because once that happens, the nootropic becomes a normalizer, and then it's hard to stop. There's no free lunch here. The trick is to use nicotine before your brain gets used to it. Now, obviously, some people shouldn't use it at all. If you have high blood pressure, anxiety issues, sleep problems, nicotine is not your friend. And if you've had a history of addictive tendencies, I wouldn't touch it. But for the right person, in the right dose, at the right frequency, nicotine might be a tool worth considering. Now, for the people who are already using it, maybe daily, maybe like I was, let's talk about quitting. So here's the good news. Quitting nicotine pouches is often easier than quitting cigarettes or vapes. But why? Because you don't have the ritualistic inhalation. You don't have the social and sensory cues, and the oral fixation is easier to replace. You can chew gum, toothpicks, even sunflower seeds, and your brain buys it. And in fact, that's exactly what I did. When I quit, I didn't taper. I didn't use patches, I just swapped the pouch for gum. Sugar-free, minty gum. I chewed like crazy for a few days, and then I was fine. Physiologically, the withdrawal period for most pouch users is short, maybe 2 to 4 days of fatigue, mood dips, and slight cravings. After a week, you're past the worst of it. Within a month, your cortisol normalizes. Your stress response resets. You're back to your pre-nicotine base levels. Now, if your use is heavier, or you're getting anxiety when you try to quit, you can always taper. Go from 6 milligrams to 3 milligrams, then to 2. You could also switch to a patch for a week or 2 to smooth the landing. Some people find that helpful. The point is, it's doable, and for most people, it's a lot easier than they expect. So what are the final takeaways? First, nicotine pouches are not harmless, but they're not evil either. They're a lower risk alternative to smoking, not a health supplement. Number 2, daily use leads to dependence, period. Even if you feel in control now, the tolerance curve is real. Eventually, you're just using it to feel normal. Number 3, if you want to quit, you can. For many users, quitting pouches is more like breaking a coffee habit than kicking heroin. Replace the ritual. Push through a few rough days. You'll come out clean. Number 4, intermittent use might be viable, but only for the disciplined. If you want to keep the cognitive benefits without dependence, limit use to 1 to 2 times a week max. Less is more. And lastly, your brain adapts quickly. Make sure you're the one in charge. Nicotine can be a tool, or it can be a trap. The difference is how you use it, and whether you're still getting value from it, or just avoiding withdrawal. So if you've used pouches, or tried quitting, let me know in the comments what your experience was like. Was it hard? Surprisingly easy? And did you feel better afterward? And if you're still using, maybe just hit pause for a week. See where your baseline really feels like. You might be surprised. And as always, I thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you.